Greetings and welcome back to room 303 and our talks with Walt, as we are calling our readings to the deathbed edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. We now turn to a poem called 1861. By the way, notice that those numbers are spelled out, right? This is poem number 2 of the 43 of the drum tap section. We go back to the little poem To Thee, O Cause, the very beginning of our talks. You'll remember my book and the war are one. Now our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net down that left-hand side. From the very beginning, and in the inscriptions poem, To Thee, O Cause, we've given a set of introductory comments to drum taps that we assume that you've already followed, and we just finished with preludes. Now our Norton's study will tell us about this poem, that in all editions before 1881, the title of this poem was in figures, as in 1861. Whitman attempted to sell this one October the 1st, 1861, to the Atlantic for $20, but James Russell Lowell, the editor, turned it down with the odd excuse that before he could use it, its interest, quote, which is of the present, would have passed, in quote, which makes that kind of fascinating in and of itself. Now, we're going to see a whole lot of carryover, and we will see why the previous poem was called Prelude, and we now will be playing the same kind of game, the excitement before the war begins. Let's just read through the poem and pay attention as we go to some of the interesting elements that are here. We begin with armed year. Notice the elided adjective, armed year, and then the dash. Notice all the dashes that will happen in the next couple of poems with beat drums. Armed year, year of the struggle. Now, this is, of course, there's going to be so many different words that will get used to describe what the Civil War was, right? The struggle here. And then he says it, no dainty rhymes or sentimental love verses for you, terrible year. Not you as some pale poetling seated at a desk, lisping cadenzas piano, but as a strong man erect. Now, notice, the very first thing he says is, we're no longer interested in these dainty. You'll remember in the previous poem it was soft, in Preludes it was soft, here it's dainty. By the way, this word dainty, for some of you are going, wait, where did we hear this one? Starting from Pomanak 15, the same word gets used. Dainty, weak, feminine rhymes, right? Or sentimental love verses for you, terrible year. So notice we go from struggle to terrible. Not you. By the way, it's an interesting thing to keep a list of all the different adjectives and verbs that Whitman uses in drum taps to try to describe the horrors of the war. And notice here it's a terrible year. Not you as some pale, notice the repetitions of the P sounds, poetling, this is the only use of this word, by the way, seated at a desk, lisping, only time that word gets used in all Leaves of Grasses in this poem, cadenzas piano. In other words, what he's saying is, we're no longer interested in silly superficialities. Now, all of a sudden, in 1861, it got real. It got real, and there's a way to even kind of say it. But notice the word but. As a strong man, now we're going to get masculine, erect, clothed in blue clothes, obviously a celebration of the Union troops, advancing, carrying rifle on your shoulder, with well-gristled body. This is the only use of the word gristled in the phrase well-gristled. Well-gristled body and sunburnt face. Go back to Song of Myself 34 with sunburnt and the way he uses it. And hands with a knife in the belt at your side. And the idea here is we're ready because all of our body is ready. All of our physical body is ready. We're excited almost to do this. And we have technology. We even have a knife by our side. As I heard you shouting loud, your sonorous voice ringing across the continent, and this idea of ringing takes us to bells, right? Your, and then he uses, the word drops, masculine voice. So notice we go from dainty to masculine. O year, as rising, notice earlier it was seated. No poetling seated. Right now it's rising amid the great cities, amid the mid of Manhattan, I saw you. And again, that I saw or I see is an old construction. We've seen it many times. As one of the workmen, the dwellers in Manhattan, or with large steps crossing the prairies. Notice we're going to sweep across America. In other words, his point is, at the very beginning, everyone gets swept up in this contest, this struggle, right? This terrible year. Large steps across the prairies out of Illinois and Indiana, rapidly crossing the west with springy gait. Notice again this idea of excitement. And descending the Alleghenies or down from the Great Lakes or in Pennsylvania. Again, this is a tour of America, very much like starting from Paumanok 14. Go back and look at that and read that in analog with this. It's quite remarkable. Down from the Great Lakes or in Pennsylvania or on deck along the Ohio River or southward along the Tennessee or Cumberland Rivers or at Chattanooga on the mountaintop. Saw I, it's interesting phraseology. Saw I your gait, we're back to the walk again, and saw I your sinewy limbs, we're from gristly to sinewy limbs, clothed in blue, we're back to that idea again, bearing weapons, robust year. So notice we go from terrible to robust. Heard your determined voice launched forth again and again. Again, this idea of launching. You get a lot of ship imagery in drum taps in these early poems. In other words, it's as if we're going out to sea, right? Year 1861, that suddenly sang, the word suddenly keeps being used in these early poems. Why? Because it's as if, although Whitman had this sense, that's that last point of, that's the point of the last poem of Roadside, Whitman had a sense something was coming, as did many Americans, but all of a sudden, suddenly it's there. And he says, suddenly sang by the mouths of the round-lipped cannon. Now, again, it's really hard often to know in drum taps how we're supposed to read some of these lines. Are we supposed to read them as ironic, or are we supposed to read them as lamentational? And notice here, it can be read as both. The irony, of course, is that we've got singing about to happen, but it's going to be of the technologies of war. Round-lipped cannon. I repeat you, hurrying, crashing, sad, distracted year. That is to say, from joy to sorrow. And I think that the obvious message here is that the realities of war often are such like this. I've told you guys, reading drum taps is an important way to, I think, understand a nation or a civilization's decision to go to war. It's a fascinating study, and notice here, he seems to be at times excited, other times ambivalent, and then other times just straightforwardly he knows this ain't gonna be good, this ain't gonna be good. The realities of war often do, though, begin with joy and end with tremendous sorrow. At 2B, I'm very interested in the word choices here, like dainty to grizzled. I want you to pay attention to the intentional language that Whitman will often use. At 3A, just a couple of titles that can come to mind here. Think about Crane's Red Badge of Courage in 1895. It will try to assume so much of what the experience was like. Reading drum taps is a terrific way to get ready to read Crane's Red Badge of Courage. Of course, Crane never actually seeing any of the battles of the Civil War. However, he interviewed a lot of young men who were in the war, and published by 1895, obviously, quite a few years after the fact. And then the other I'd recommend to you to take a look at is the great Ken Burns' documentary, The Civil War from 1990. It's one of the finest single representations of how this whole experience gets treated. And in those very early episodes, Burns makes the point of how excited everyone seemed to be for this kind of thing, both for the Confederacy as well as for the Union, how so many people were so excited, not realizing what was about to come. And that leads us obviously to 3B. It's an interesting way to try and own this poem. I'll ask this question of you. What year for you has been your most hurrying, crashing, sad, distracted year? And why? Again, if Whitman does anything, he makes it personal, right? Thank you.